Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Deace.
Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bigger Ten. I am Steve Deace with my co-host, who will never be my partner, the one and only Aaron McIntyre, as we are barreling towards the halfway point of the most wonderful time of the year, brother. Some of the leaves are starting to change, fall from the trees. That means it's time to be separating the pretenders from the contenders. How you doing?
Yeah, and we already got a start on that last Saturday, and so that just continues on into this weekend as well. I'll just give you a preview tomorrow coming up on Confidence Picks. I thought this was the toughest week by far to do.
I agree.
Confidence picks. So I don't know what that says about the league necessarily, but it tells you about a lot about what we've seen recently from teams. I'm unsure of a lot of things now, and that's pretty typical fare for this time of the year. As fast as I felt September went by, October's going by much, much quicker.
And last week and this coming week, comprehensively in terms of the sport in general, probably the two best weeks of games. Now, who knows, a few weeks from now, things may happen that suddenly some games that we don't think matter quite a bit. But at least right now on paper, these are we're immersed in the two best weeks of the season until we get to rivalry week at the end of the year. Just a ton of big time matchups. Well, let's start our big five on Bigger Ten, though, by looking back at an absolute all-time classic, Aaron. It is rare when a game has 9 months of hype, the way that Oregon and Ohio State did once the Ducks were finalized to come into the league, once the league schedule was finalized, but this one did. And I know Jed Fish, the Washington coach, made a comment along these lines, watching that game himself. The level of play, man, these are the two most expensive rosters in our league by far in terms of overall roster cost. The only other two schools in the country, probably Georgia, Miami, maybe Texas, come even close. It definitely looked like they were playing a different sport than the rest of us. For example, star wide receiver for Oregon was a guy who had done nothing up until this point, Evan Stewart, but he was a 5-star recruit 2 years ago, and he just freaking torched Denzel Burke for the Buckeyes, who a lot of people think is a first-round pick in next April's draft, and made him look like he was junior varsity. He's just been riding the pine for Oregon. And they just kind of threw him out there with a couple of injuries. The rest of the teams in our league don't have that kind of depth. I thought on the Oregon side, it's the first time they've ever beaten a top 2 team in the history of their program. Dylan Gabriel looked every bit like a college football Hall of Famer. And I think the Ducks now clearly have the inside track. We'll talk more on the Ohio State angle here in a minute, but I think the Ducks now clearly have the inside track on at least one half of the formula for the Big Ten championship game here coming up in December.
Indeed, and I said it all off season, and I said it last season as well when we knew we were watching the last season of the Pac-12. I thought Oregon going forward was going to be the most Big Ten ready team in terms of the physicality and depth that you need to compete in this league at a high level for the entire season. And what do I mean by that? I mean teams like USC and Washington, especially USC. You know, you played LSU your first game in week 1, and it looked like you were a Big Ten team there, but are you really ready for that grind over Big Ten schedule? And it looks like Oregon definitely is. Here we are sitting in the middle of October. And not only are they Big Ten ready in terms of physicality and depth, they are Big Ten ready to compete at the upper echelons with the Ohio States of the world and Michigan once they get rolling again, and Penn State if they continue to have the season that they're having. So hats off to Oregon. This is the team that I expected to see going in. You know, some of the concerns we had the first few weeks of the season. Idaho, that was just a weird game. Boise State, Ashton Genty can just run on anybody now, so you're not quite as concerned about that. Those struggles against Boise State. So, hats off to Oregon here. And if you're an Ohio State fan, you really don't, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, I don't think you have much to hang your head about at all. at all. I mean, it was just a classic game. And, 2 weeks in a row, actually 2 out of the last 3 weeks, we had all that anticipation about the Alabama-Georgia game from a few weeks ago. That lived up to the expectations somehow. This one definitely lived up to the expectations. And it looked like we were watching kind of an NFL game out there. When you're doing same-game parlays in the NFL, and you're like, well, I think this guy could score a touchdown, and I think this guy could score a touchdown, and this guy could. No, that's not going to happen because you have very limited possessions, and your margin for error is really, really, really small. And that's kind of what we saw out there. It just looked like an NFL game, maybe NFL light to some degree, but in terms of the level of play, it was a very, very high level of play. Nothing easy for the most part was given to either team.
No doubt. So let's talk about the Buckeyes. Ryan Day and Ohio State fall again in a marquee matchup. Ryan Day is now 2-5 against top 5 teams. And guys, I don't know if anybody watching this knows this. It's hard to beat top 5 teams, but this is Ohio State, and they do pay top dollar. So 2-5 there is not going to cut it. Ryan Day 5-3 overall in his last 8 games. I thought the Buckeye defensive line was dominated at the line of scrimmage by Oregon, at least as much as you can in a game of 2 teams of this magnitude. You just never really felt like the Ohio State pass rush was going to get to Dylan Gabriel and get him off his spot very often. And Oregon was able to run the ball enough to keep them off balance and be balanced and be effective. That entire defensive line could have gone to the NFL last year. So I think if I'm a Buckeye fan, if I have any concerns coming out of this game, it's that. I'm not concerned about Will Howard. Will Howard was fantastic. I know he's going to get nailed for that boneheaded play at the end, running out the clock, and he deserves it to some extent. We're also talking about a guy that had his highest QBR he's had all year, his best QBR in over 2 years. And in that environment, on the road, with a team he's still getting used to. I mean, I thought Will Howard was absolutely fantastic. That final play where he ran out the clock, notwithstanding, but he had some help in the clock management problems there for the Ohio State University. So I think this is still a top 5 team. Their schedule is tougher. They've still got Indiana. They've still got Penn State on the road. I mean, they play Michigan. It's a marquee game. Who knows how much of a marquee matchup that'll be by the time we get to the end of the year. So their road to challenge Oregon in a rematch is much harder than what Penn State faces the rest of the way. But I think they are still firmly ensconced as a playoff team, and that is still a team in a one-and-done scenario you probably don't want to line up against.
Yeah, and I'll just say this about Ohio State as well. It's weird. I know they're the Death Star. They're the evil empire. I'm actually pulling for them, if nothing else, than for Travion Henderson alone. I don't know if you've seen this, but his testimony that he's put out there, basically when he was injured, he came to the realization that I got to have something to live for other than football here, and that's when he decided to embrace the Christian faith, and I really appreciate that. And he's been a strong, so far this season, a strong witness. So I'm pulling for Ohio State, if nothing else, for Travion Henderson alone. But I had kind of the same observation about the defensive line. That's the one area going forward that I would be most concerned about. And there are no moral victories in college football whatsoever, especially when you're competing at the level that Ohio State is competing at and spending at the level that you're spending at to attain, retain, and add to that roster, which they did in the offseason. But Autzen Stadium, there are a lot of pundits out there, and I've never been to Autzen Stadium, probably never will be. There are some pundits out there that say that's, if it's not in the top 5, it's top 10 most difficult environments to play in the country. And you went out there and you competed for 60 minutes and you got beat by 1. Those things just happen. So if you're an Ohio State fan, I wouldn't be super concerned. You just can't go into Beaver Stadium next and let this loss beat you twice. Don't you? I hope they don't have that mindset where it's, well, we're going on the road against a top 5 team. Here we are. You should not have that if you're a Buckeye. So I don't really think there's much more to add to that. Of course, you saw today they officially NCAA changed the rule regarding clock, the 12 men on the field. I was going to come in here and ask you if that was something that Dan Lanning did on purpose, if you thought so. And
he says he did.
He basically said that, he did. And so they're changing the rule as far as that goes. So I don't know. It's cheating. Yeah, you're violating the spirit of the law.
They took the penalty. How's it cheating? They took the penalty.
You're violating the spirit of the law. Anytime you violate the spirit of a law, you're cheating. But it is brilliant nonetheless. It's like Ocean's 11. You're stealing. That was a really brilliant plan, though. You can tip your cap to that while still saying it's violating. I
guess I cheat every time I drive the interstate. I'm cheating every time.
Yep.
So we're all cheaters. Okay, it's just as long as we apply the standard equally. Let me say this, and I'm certainly no Buckeye apologist here in my Michigan man cave, but Dylan Gabriel played as well as he could play. Those wide receivers played as well as they could play. Oregon's offensive line played as well as it could play, and Dan Lanning pulled out an all-time Bill Belichick gamesmanship move at the end. And you were on the road in that environment at night, and you lost by 1 point. You know where I'm going with this? I mean, Oregon pulled out every freaking stop, man, and you lost by 1 point. Yeah. I think you're going to be okay.
Yes, and we'll talk about that in a couple of topics. I mean, the travel thing again. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The wins are not at your in your sails if you're traveling 2+ time zones away. So you add that in there too.
All right, let's talk about Penn State. Speaking of making that 2 time zone travel, they're one of the few to get a win, but they also did not cover in their game. But they did go out to USC and get a win. Really, if you watch this game, USC just gave this game away. They were on Penn State from the jump. They were up 20-6 at the half. They were +3 in turnovers. I mean, you have to win. When you're at home and it's 20-6 and you're in a positive turnover ratio, you have to win that football game. I agree that Penn State got away with at least one blatant PI in the overtime. The first pass play, he was probably there early, but that was more of a bang-bang play. The third down play I thought was a very obvious PI. So if you want to say Penn State got away with 2 of those in OT, that's fine. But you cannot let a team come in and have their quarterback throw 3 interceptions against you. You're up 20-6 at the half, and you don't win that game. I mean, you have to win that game. I mean, Penn State effectively ended USC season. We were sitting here after they beat LSU thinking, could this team 10-2, 11-1, 9-3? I mean, now you got to ask yourself where they're at mentally, because now they've got to go this week, the 2 time zones again out to sleepy College Park, Maryland, to play for what? I mean, how much do you think the USC kids care about whether they're in the Music City Bowl or the Motor City Bowl? Probably not at all. So their season is effectively over. Penn State now, you start looking at their schedule, and except for that home game against Ohio State, tell me where the loss is on the rest of that schedule, brother, because I do not see it for Penn State. So maybe they've got to go to Wisconsin late in the year, and the Badgers have played better the last couple of weeks. But to me, I think, 10-2 is the absolute bare minimum for Penn State, and give them credit with a gut check comeback win there, and that play call that Andy Kotonecki had for their first touchdown, where they threw it to the tackle. Okay, on
center.
A flea flicker. Or the center, I'm sorry. Yeah, on a flea flicker. All right, that is for me as a Lions fan, that's some serious Ben Johnson stuff right there. Enjoyed that, So it was a gut check win for Penn State for sure, but if I'm a USC fan, man, I mean, we've lost 3 games by a grand total of 13 points in this league, and your season's over, and we've still got 2 weeks till Halloween.
Isn't that 3 games now where they were leading in the 4th quarter and they couldn't figure out how to close the game?
Correct.
Yeah, that is most of the time that's coaching. You can point to it as bad luck once, you can point to it as coincidence twice, but when it's 3 times, that points to coaching and not really figuring out or knowing how to close games out. I mean, we're talking about this is not the same level. This is not going on years on end of Nebraska-style blowing games, but that's kind of what comes to mind when you just repeatedly can't figure out how to close out games. And I know one game was at Michigan, one game was in Minnesota, but this one was at home, and you had them on the ropes, and you let them off the hook. So I don't really know where you go if you're USC from here. I guess the bright side is that you're far enough into the season that a bunch of guys can't take their medical red shirts and announce they're entering the transfer portal now. That's the bright side, I guess.
That means you're paying these guys to suck
exactly.
now, too, at the other end, too. Yeah. But, yeah, go ahead.
So I'm not really sure what you're playing for if you're USC now, because that's 3 losses in the league. This is kind of the era that we're in now, where, in previous years, after 2 losses, you probably would have been, well, what are we really playing for? Now, I guess it's 3 losses that you're asking that question, but I mean, I guess you're just continuing to develop a culture, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Try to hang your hat on something, and if you're Lincoln Riley, you got to think you have to go on a win streak here to end the season, don't you? You got to go on a win streak in here to end the season, or else you will be firmly on the hot seat start of next season, given the expectations at that program. And given what he's shown he can do, I think, still with quarterbacks, you got to go on some sort of win streak here, but I'm not sure how you motivate your guys to get up for every single game.
I think this is going to be a problem. I've been talking about this in relationship to Michigan since the second loss. But I think if you are a program at the level of Michigan, USC, and the idea, well, let's play young guys to develop them, you got to be careful with that too, Aaron, because you may be putting on tape how good your young guys are for other schools to come raid your roster during the portal time. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you could also be developing younger guys you don't even know will be on your roster next year. And I think this whole thing with unlimited free agency and guys getting paid, when teams are out of it and you're one of these top tier programs with a big brand like a USC or a Michigan, if they lose to Illinois this week, I'm sorry, guys are going to check out. And even if they can't hop in the portal right now and sign with another school, they'll just check out on your team internally. I mean, they'll be like, why do I want to blow out my knee playing Maryland on a Saturday night? Why would I want to do that when I've got, mama and my siblings at home waiting for me to get drafted and pay the bills? And I don't know that anybody can blame them for that. Who gives a flying flip whether you're in the Music City or Motor City Bowl or in any of them, frankly? So this is the new world that we are in. And I just think because they haven't visibly seen it yet, that a lot of fans are not ready for it. And so I have no idea what kind of effort USC will give on the road at Maryland later this week at night. No idea. And that would be true even if we didn't have the paradigm shift we have, the classic dream crusher loss. I mean, all their season goals are gone. They're not playing Notre Dame in a rivalry game where they can spoil their season. It's Maryland, Speaking of that travel, I know that much has been made about these two trends, so let's talk about them. Right now, teams that are making the 2 time zone trip are 3-10 overall, 2-11 against the spread. So Penn State got an outright win but did not cover the spread. So they're 2-11 against the spread, 3-10 overall if you're making the 2 time zone trip. What do you think? Too early to take something away from that?
No.
Or not?
That's 12, 13 games of data.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of data.
That would be a season for one team. Yeah.
Do you think that they fully fleshed this out?
No.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't either. On the one hand, I can see how some TV executives would say, hey, this could make for some interesting programming. But if you are the league...
And that Penn State USC game looked great in that CBS HD, brother.
Oh, man. Yeah. So that's one thing. If you're the conference, though, you want your best teams to not be handicapped by things like this. So I don't think it's too early to take anything away from that. I'm not sure what the prevailing thought will be. And I think there might, as I just spelled out, I think there might be some disagreement between the television partners and the league about what this means. But I tend to think that they didn't really think this through. There's a reason why regionality was a thing before in college football. And with the exception of like one conference, it's not anymore.
You look at what Washington's had to do here. They had to go on the road on a Friday night and play Rutgers, come back home across the country, play Michigan, go back on the road across the country, play at Iowa. Look at what USC had to do. Okay. They had to go across the country, play Michigan, come back and play Wisconsin, go back across the country and play Minnesota, go back across the country and host Penn State. I mean, look at what Oregon's got to do this week. Go on the road, short week at Purdue. And I mean, Purdue's probably the worst team in our league, but if you're a longtime Big Ten football fan, We don't call them the spoiler makers for nothing. I mean, Purdue has more wins over top 10 ranked Notre Dame teams than any other of Notre Dame's historic opponents do.
Yeah, I pointed this out in the offseason that this was a trap game for Oregon, especially if they beat Ohio State, which they did. I don't think they're going to be. I don't think it's going to be close. But now that we have this trend, you don't know. You don't know. And Purdue showed. I don't know what to make of Illinois anymore, but Purdue showed they can put up points if they have to. So.
By the way, I thought when Ryan Walters said he took over the play calling, he was talking about the defense, brother. It turns out he was talking about the offense.
Yeah.
He took over. So he was a hell of a defensive coordinator for Brett Bielema at Illinois. He actually took over calling the offensive plays.
I saw
what he was talking about.
You tweeted from the Bigger Ten account, wow, we've got 2 concurrent overtime games in the Big Ten. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? Went over and checked the score, and there it was.
Yeah.
Come all the way back.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
All right, let's talk about this week, the big game this week. I mean, Michigan, Illinois feels like kind of an elimination game. But to me, the biggest game, that's where Big Noon Saturday is going to be, is Nebraska at Indiana, just like we all predicted in the preseason, brother. A Nebraska team that hasn't been to a bowl game since 2016, and prior to 16 minutes ago, an Indiana team that named the field after coaches that took them to bowl games. All right. They are playing the biggest game in our league this week. The Hoosiers off to their best start since their last Rose Bowl team in 1967. And what I find fascinating about this is if you look at the teams Indiana's played so far, and I don't want to do the ain't played nobody. There are fan bases that are going to jump on Twitter in November and say, ain't played anybody. Okay, that's a trope of college football fandom. But when you just look at matchups, and this time of year, when you're smoking teams like Indiana is, you're a good team. When you look week in and week out that much better than your opposition, you're a very good team. The thing I am curious about, though, is if you look at Indiana's first 6 opponents, Aaron, none of them could bring the pressure with the front 4 that Nebraska could. Or can. And I will be fascinated to see what happens if Nebraska is able to, say, play a light box throughout the game and then just kind of sit back and say, you're not beating us over the top. We think we can keep everything in front of us, and we can get to Curtis O'Rourke. We can get to him with 4 guys, most downs. That is the one thing that Indiana has not faced yet, is a team that can hit them in the mouth in the trenches. And they're going to see that this Saturday for sure.
Yeah, Indiana, this will be their biggest test for sure to this point in the season. And I just want to see what they are like. And we already know what we think Nebraska is like in one-score games. I think this is going to be a big growing up game for one of these programs, actually. Mm-hmm. What can you do? What can you do late, middle of the fourth quarter? The game is still very much in doubt. Okay, who can make the play? And I think that's going to be a big growing up moment for one of these teams, because Indiana, they handled Northwestern, got punched in the face a couple of times versus Northwestern, but they really haven't had much of a test this season so far. This is going to be their first test. So I'm anxious to see whether or not Nebraska can actually hang around. I mean, this game opened up as, I think the very early look-ahead line was like 3.5 points. It reopened as 5. Now it's up to 6.5. That kind of surprises me. I don't know for sure, given that they haven't been tested. I'm not sure that Indiana's a touchdown favorite against anybody with a pulse. I have no reason to necessarily doubt it. I'm just not totally sure. So this will be, like I said, a big test for both of these teams, and probably a growing up moment for one of them.
Amen. All right, when we come back, we're going to play Would You Rather. Stay tuned. All right, Aaron, let's play some Would You Rather here on Bigger Ten. I've got one for you. Would you rather bet Northwestern money line at home or Michigan State? Both are 3-3. Both are hosting 4-2 teams this week. That's Wisconsin for Northwestern and Iowa for Michigan State. Which of those home dogs would you rather bet on the money line to outright win?
Probably, Wisconsin is not as bad as I thought they would be after Van Dyke went down. But I would probably go Michigan State. Just the feast or famine quarterback that they have there right now with Aiden Childs. Mm-hmm. Iowa has proven, again, that they can they can give up big plays over the air. And Washington didn't have any big 50, 60, 70-yard bombs or anything like that, but Washington at multiple times through the game just moved the ball on Iowa's defense, and that's a credit to Jed Fish in the system that he's already instilled at Washington. But this defense isn't nearly as stingy as it used to be, or at least it was last year for Iowa. So I would probably go narrowly Michigan State pulling the upset against Iowa. It's at night, on NBC. I don't know. I think that's probably the more likely upset. I wouldn't bet either of them. I don't trust Northwestern yet, and that seems weird after they came up with a big win on the road at Maryland. But Maryland. What do you think of Maryland at this point? I think they're maybe bottom 4.
Well, we're going to talk about Maryland here in a minute, so let me save it for that. Why would you rather?
I think Michigan State would probably be the one. I still don't trust Northwestern very much. Next one is for you. Would you rather bet Indiana or Penn State to make the Big Ten championship game?
Penn State, without question. I think they have better talent, and I think their second half schedule is even easier than Indiana's. That one's a simple one for me.
Okay.
All right, for you. Would you rather hire Mike Locksley to coach your team after a bye week? He is winless at Maryland in that scenario. Winless. Never heard of such a thing. Or hire Eric Bieniemy to coordinate your offense. UCLA has scored its fewest points through 6 games in a season since Eisenhower was president. So would you rather have Mike Locksley prep your team for a bye week? Or Eric Bieniemy coordinate your offense? By the way, you're going to see in the game picks, I kind of like Maryland against USC. I kind of do.
I would still take Mike Locksley. There's a reason why Bieniemy just kind of hung around Kansas City until he was able to take co-offensive coordinator at the Commanders, lasted a season there, and now he's on with UCLA. I just don't think he's a very good offensive coordinator.
Yeah, so Eric Bieniemy with Andy Reid is Kate Hudson, Kate. Is it Kate Winslet? Who's
You're going to have to make your analogies in Harry Potter terms because I'm not very well.
All right, let's do it in Harry Potter terms. Eric Bieniemy with Andy Reid is Harry Potter. And Eric Bieniemy without Andy Reid is Luna Lovegood, basically.
Yeah.
That's what we're saying? Okay. Yeah. All right. You've got one more for me?
Yeah. Would you rather bet Michigan to cover -3.5 or Purdue to cover +27.5?
Oh, Purdue easily. I wouldn't want any part of that hook in the Michigan game at all. I would rather. I do think Purdue has discovered a little something here on offense, and I could see that being a 45-24 kind of a game. Purdue scores late, backdoor is open. You bet. I'd much rather bet Purdue.
So Oregon has already.
I think the backdoor. I think every scenario. Michigan could get blown out. Michigan could lose close, win close, blow them out. We have no clue. We're halfway through the year, the defending national champions. We have no clue who that team is. But I think the back door is pretty much always going to be open Friday night in West Lafayette.
Oregon has already played a Friday night game. That was just a few weeks ago against Michigan State. And that was at home for them, and they didn't cover versus Michigan State. So,
All
right, that's it.
All right, we'll come back, wrap things up here with your feedback of the week and our X-Poll results next. This week's X-Poll results, we asked you, will we see an Oregon-Ohio State rematch in the Big Ten championship game in 50 days? 77% of you said yes. 23% of you said no. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, I voted yes. I as weird as it says, we made fun of this during Big Ten media days, football media days.
It was everybody's pick.
Yeah. It was everybody's pick. But I think after seeing that the other night, I think that's pretty likely. I'm not... Unless Penn State can spring an upset against Ohio State, and they do have them at home, this is probably going to be the most likely. I don't see Ohio State. And Ohio State versus Penn State, I don't think is a great matchup for Penn State this year necessarily.
Or most years.
So unless that happens, you just have to pencil this in already.
Let's just be honest. Ohio State has not been a good matchup for Penn State in any non-Saquon Barkley years. Let's just be honest about that.
Ohio State is not a good matchup for basically anybody.
For 99% of college football, you're right about that. Yes. All right, that brings us to our feedback of the week. Doug Gaynor wants to remind us, man, you guys sure blew this pick about Maryland and Northwestern last week. And you're right, we did. I got nothing else. We did.
You blew it worse than I did.
Maryland dominated on the stat sheet like our pick was correct. And then I think they just turned the ball over again. I think bye weeks and Friday nights are not Mike Locksley's jam. I think we've pretty much established that.
As you will see tomorrow in my confidence picks review of last week, I am looking for any win I possibly can glean. And that is that you blew that pick worse than I did.
Okay.
By 1 point.
All right. Well, we are going to have our confidence picks here coming up for you on the channel tomorrow. Until then, and until our next episode, don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, follow. Help us to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you, and appreciate all of you that do those things for us. And say hi to us in the comments section and tell us how much you like us, even though you probably don't. You can also follow us over on X/Twitter in between episodes as well, at Bigger10 there. At Bigger10 there. For Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you right here next week on Bigger 10.